I'm 79 years old now, and my name isn't Margaret, it's Helen. I spent most of my life working as a school librarian, surrounded by quiet shelves, the smell of paper, and the soft turning of pages. These days, the house is quieter than any library I ever worked in. I live alone at the edge of a small town, in the same house my husband and I bought nearly 40 years ago. When he passed, people came with their voices full of concern and their eyes full of pity. They told me I shouldn't stay here by myself. They said I would get lonely, that I would forget things, that a woman my age needed someone around just in case something went wrong. They meant well, I know they did, but they were wrong in ways they couldn't understand at the time, and honestly, in ways I didn't understand either. If you saw me now, you might think I had always been this way. I wake up early without stiffness locking my joints. I walk through my house without needing to hold on to furniture. I cook my meals. I water the plants on my porch. I even climb the small step ladder in my kitchen when I need something from the top shelf. There is a quiet strength in me now that wasn't there a few years ago. But it didn't start like this. It started in a much darker, heavier place. The first year after my husband passed felt like I had been dropped into a life I didn't recognize. I would wake up late, sometimes not even realizing how long I had been lying there staring at the ceiling. My body felt heavy, as if something invisible was pressing me into the mattress. When I finally forced myself up, I would shuffle slowly to the kitchen, one hand brushing the wall for balance. I would make coffee, sit at the table, and just sit. Hours would pass like that. No purpose, no direction, just waiting for the day to end so I could go back to bed again. My son, Daniel, would call me almost every evening. He lives in another city with his own family, his own responsibilities. His voice always carried that careful tone, the one people use when they're worried but don't want to say it outright. He would ask if I had eaten, if I had gone outside, if I was feeling all right, and every time I would give him the same answer. I'm fine. It became a habit, almost automatic. But the truth was, I wasn't fine, not even close. I wasn't living. I was simply moving from 1 hour to the next, doing the bare minimum to get through the day. There's a difference between being alive and actually living, and I was stuck somewhere in between. I think a lot of people who find themselves alone for the first time fall into that same quiet trap. You tell yourself you're managing, that you're okay, because admitting otherwise feels like giving up control. But deep down, you know something isn't right. One morning, everything changed, though not in the way you might expect. It wasn't some grand realization or emotional breakthrough. It was something much smaller and, in a way, much more frightening. I woke up and tried to sit up, but my body didn't respond the way it used to. My back felt stiff, almost locked in place. My legs were slow to move, like they didn't quite belong to me. When I tried to stand, I had to grab the edge of the nightstand just to steady myself. For a moment, I just stood there, holding on, my heart beating faster than it should have been, and the thought came to me, quiet but sharp. This is how it starts. Not all at once, not in some dramatic, obvious way. It starts slowly, in small moments you almost ignore. A little stiffness here, a little weakness there, a hesitation before standing, a need to hold on to something for balance. And before you realize it, those small moments begin to shape your entire life. That morning, standing there with my hand gripping the nightstand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fear, real, undeniable fear. I thought about what would happen if I kept going the way I had been. More sitting, more waiting, more telling myself I was fine when I clearly wasn't. I imagined needing help for the simplest things, losing the independence I had always valued so deeply, and something inside me refused to accept that future. I wasn't ready to fade into it quietly. So I made a decision. Not a big, overwhelming plan, not a complete overhaul of my life, just a decision to change a few small things. Things that felt manageable, things I could actually follow through on. I didn't trust myself to make big promises at that point, but small ones. Small ones felt possible. The first change came from something I almost ignored for years: water. It sounds so simple that most people would dismiss it without a second thought. I used to be the same way. My mornings always began with coffee, strong, hot, comforting. It gave me something to hold on to, something to sip while I sat in silence. I never questioned it. It was just part of the routine. But looking back, I realized my body had been trying to tell me something for a long time. I used to wake up with a dull heaviness in my head, like my thoughts were moving through fog. My fingers would feel tight, slightly swollen, especially around the rings I wore. My knees would ache before I even took my first step of the day. I accepted all of it as normal. After all, I was getting older. That's what people expect, isn't it? One afternoon, months before that difficult morning by the bed, I had been sorting through some old books I brought home from the library when I retired. I came across one about aging, written in a way that didn't feel clinical or distant. It spoke plainly, almost gently, about how our bodies change over time. There was a section about hydration, something I had never paid much attention to. It said that as we age, our sense of thirst becomes less reliable, that we can be dehydrated without even realizing it. It explained how the body loses water overnight, just from breathing, from existing, from the simple act of being alive. And then it asked a question that stayed with me. What is the first thing you give your body in the morning? I knew my answer immediately: coffee. I remember sitting there, holding that book in my lap, thinking about all those mornings. The stiffness, the fog, the quiet discomfort I had learned to ignore. What if it wasn't just age? What if part of it was something I could actually change? That night, for the first time, I filled a simple glass of water and placed it on my nightstand. It felt almost unnecessary, like I was humoring an idea rather than truly believing in it. But the next morning, before I reached for anything else, before I even fully woke up, I drank it. Slowly, steadily, letting it settle. The change wasn't immediate in some dramatic way, but within a few days, I noticed something subtle. My mouth didn't feel as dry when I woke up. My head felt a little clearer. After a week, the stiffness in my hands had eased. My knees didn't complain as loudly when I stood. It wasn't a miracle. It was something quieter than that. It was my body responding gently to something it had been missing. That small habit became my first anchor. Something simple, something I could do every single morning without effort or resistance. It reminded me that not everything required a grand solution. Sometimes the smallest changes create the deepest shifts. Around that same time, I started paying attention to something else I had quietly let disappear from my life: light. Not the artificial glow from the lamps in my living room or the kitchen ceiling, but real morning light. There was a time when I used to sit on my front porch almost every day. I would watch the sky shift from soft gray to pale gold, listen to the distant sounds of the neighborhood waking up. It was peaceful in a way that's hard to describe, but somewhere along the way I had stopped. I told myself I didn't feel like it, that it didn't matter, that I could sit inside just as easily, and for a while I believed that. Until one morning, I opened the front door without really thinking about it. The air was cooler than I expected. The light was soft, not harsh or overwhelming, just enough to gently touch everything around me. I stepped outside and stood there for a moment, unsure of why I had even opened the door in the first place, and then I noticed something. I felt awake, not in the rushed, jittery way that coffee sometimes brings, but in a calm, steady way. It was as if something inside me had been quietly waiting for that moment. I didn't stay out long that first day, maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, but it was enough. The next morning, I did it again, and the morning after that. It became another small habit, another quiet promise I kept to myself. I didn't think of it as exercise or a task. I simply stood there breathing, noticing, allowing the day to begin around me instead of hiding from it. Over time, those few minutes began to change how I felt for the rest of the day. My sleep improved without me even trying. The heaviness I used to carry in the mornings began to lift. It wasn't that my life suddenly became easy or perfect. It was that I started to feel present again, connected in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Looking back now, I realize something important. None of these changes were dramatic. There was no single moment where everything suddenly became better. It was a series of small decisions, repeated quietly, day after day. A glass of water, a few minutes of light, simple things most people overlook. But when you're living alone, when there's no one else there to guide your day or check on your habits, those small things become everything. They become the difference between slowly fading and slowly rebuilding. And I didn't know it yet at the time, but those first small changes were only the beginning of something much bigger than I had ever expected. After those first small changes, something inside me began to shift in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't sudden and it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. I started to notice that I wasn't dreading the mornings as much. I wasn't lying in bed wondering how I would get through another long, quiet day. Instead, there was a faint sense of structure beginning to form, like the early outline of something steady and dependable. But even with that progress, there was still something missing. My body was slowly waking up again, but my mind still felt fragile. There were moments that unsettled me more than I liked to admit. I would walk into a room and forget why I had gone there. I would pause in the middle of a sentence, searching for a word that used to come to me effortlessly. Once I stood in the kitchen holding a spoon, completely unsure of what I had been about to do. I remember placing it down very carefully, as if that might somehow restore the thought I had lost. It didn't. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have because it brought back that same quiet fear I had felt standing by my bed weeks earlier. This is how it starts. That thought returned, and this time it wasn't about my body. It was about my mind. I had spent my life surrounded by books, by words, by information. I had always taken pride in my memory, in my ability to recall details, names, stories. The idea of losing that part of myself frightened me in a way I can't fully explain. It felt like losing more than just memory. It felt like losing identity. For a few days, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was normal, that everyone forgets things, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew I didn't want to wait and see if it got worse. I had already learned something important from those first small changes. Waiting doesn't fix anything. Action, even small action, does. So I asked myself a simple question. If my body needed a gentle way to wake up in the morning, what did my mind need? The answer didn't come all at once. It came slowly, through observation more than anything else. I noticed that my mind felt sharpest in the early hours of the day, right after I woke up, before I got caught up in thoughts or distractions. It was a quiet window of clarity that I had been wasting without realizing it. I used to fill that time with worry or with nothing at all, just sitting and letting my thoughts drift without direction. I decided to try something different. Nothing complicated, nothing overwhelming. Just a few minutes of intentional focus. I found a small notebook in one of my drawers, the kind I used to carry around at the library to jot down notes. It felt familiar in my hands, almost comforting. The next morning, after my water and my time outside, I sat down at the kitchen table with that notebook. At first, I didn't even know what to write. I just stared at the blank page, feeling slightly foolish. But then I remembered something I used to tell children at the library when they didn't know where to begin. Start small. So I did. I wrote down a simple math problem. Nothing impressive, just numbers that required a bit of attention. I solved it slowly, letting my mind focus on the process. Then I closed my eyes and tried to recall something from my past. Not in a rushed or pressured way, but gently, like turning the pages of a book. I pictured my wedding day, the way the room looked, the way my husband smiled at me. I stayed with that memory for a moment, letting it become clear. Then I opened my eyes again and wrote down a few words I didn't use often. Words I had once loved but had somehow drifted away from. I said them out loud, quietly, just to hear them again. Finally, I sat still for a moment and imagined the rest of my day going smoothly, not perfectly, just calmly, moving from one task to the next without frustration or confusion. The entire process took only a few minutes. When I finished, I didn't feel dramatically different, but I felt present, more aware, more connected to my thoughts. It was subtle, but it was enough to make me try it again the next day, and then the next. Within a couple of weeks, the change became noticeable. I wasn't forgetting things as often. When I walked into a room, I remembered why I was there. Conversations felt easier, more natural. I wasn't searching for words as much. It was as if my mind had been waiting for me to engage with it again, to give it a reason to stay active. That simple notebook became part of my mornings, just like the water and the light. Another small habit, quietly reinforcing everything else I was building. But even as my mind began to feel stronger, my body still had moments of resistance. The stiffness had improved, yes, but there were days when I still felt unsteady. Days when I hesitated before bending down or reaching for something. The memory of losing my balance that morning by the bed had not completely faded. It lingered in the back of my mind, reminding me that progress could be fragile if I didn't continue to support it. I had always believed that exercise meant effort, strain, pushing yourself until you felt something. That was the image I had carried for most of my life. But at my age, that approach didn't feel right anymore. In fact, every time I tried to follow those old ideas, I ended up feeling worse, not better. My body didn't need to be pushed. It needed to be understood. The turning point came when I nearly lost my balance one afternoon while reaching down to pick up a small basket near the floor. It wasn't a dramatic fall, but it was enough to shake me. I caught myself on the edge of the table, my heart racing again, that same fear rising quietly. This is how it starts. That thought had become familiar now, almost like a warning signal, and each time it appeared, I responded a little differently. Instead of freezing, instead of ignoring it, I used it as a reason to act. I decided to seek guidance, something I hadn't done before. I found a local therapist who worked specifically with older adults. I remember feeling slightly embarrassed walking into that room, as if I was admitting weakness, but what I found there was not judgment, but understanding. She watched how I moved, how I stood, how I tried to stretch. After a few moments, she gently stopped me. She told me something that changed the way I looked at my body entirely. The movements that helped you when you were younger aren't always the ones your body needs now. That sentence stayed with me. I had been trying to treat my body as if it hadn't changed, as if it should still respond the same way it did decades ago. But it had changed, and instead of fighting that, I needed to work with it. She showed me simple movements, small, controlled, almost effortless. Nothing that required me to get down on the floor or strain my muscles, just gentle actions that encouraged my body to wake up slowly, movements that felt safe. The next morning, I tried them on my own. Sitting in a chair, I rolled my shoulders forward and back, slowly, feeling the stiffness ease just a little. I lifted my knees one at a time, not high, just enough to feel the motion. I stood and held onto the counter lightly, bending my knees slightly and straightening again, over and over, without forcing anything. At first, it felt almost too easy, like it couldn't possibly make a difference. But I remembered how I had felt about the water, about the light, about the notebook. Simple doesn't mean ineffective, it means sustainable. So I kept going. Days turned into weeks, and the difference became undeniable. I moved more freely. I didn't hesitate as much before standing or bending. The fear that had once accompanied those movements began to fade. I trusted my body a little more each day, and in return it responded with strength I didn't expect to regain. What surprised me the most wasn't just the physical improvement. It was the confidence that came with it, the quiet belief that I was still capable, still in control of my own life, that I wasn't defined by my age or by the assumptions people made about what someone my age should or shouldn't be able to do. But even with all these changes, there was still one area I had overlooked for years, something so basic, so ordinary that I had never thought to question it. And it wasn't until I found myself struggling with something as simple as carrying a grocery bag that I realized how much it mattered. That afternoon at the grocery store stayed with me longer than I expected. It wasn't just about the bag being heavy, it was about what that moment represented. I had stood there holding the handle, trying to lift it into my cart, and my arms simply didn't respond the way I thought they would. A young man nearby noticed and stepped forward without hesitation. He smiled kindly and said, "Let me help you with that." I thanked him, of course, because I was raised to be polite, but as I walked away, something inside me felt unsettled. It wasn't pride in the way people often think of it. It wasn't about refusing help. It was about realizing that I had slowly allowed myself to become weaker without even noticing. That moment wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of small habits, choices I had repeated without questioning. And just like before, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table that evening, thinking quietly. I thought about what I had been eating, especially in the mornings. For years, my breakfast had been light, almost delicate. A piece of toast with a little jam, maybe some fruit, and coffee. It felt appropriate somehow, like that was what someone my age was supposed to eat, something simple, something easy. I had convinced myself that I didn't need much, that my body required less now than it used to. But sitting there that evening, replaying that moment in the grocery store, I began to see it differently. My body wasn't asking for less, it was asking for something different, something it wasn't getting. The next morning, I made a small change. Instead of reaching for bread and jam, I opened the refrigerator and took out 2 eggs. I hadn't made eggs for breakfast in a long time. It felt almost unfamiliar, like I was stepping outside of a routine I had followed for years. I cooked them slowly, added a handful of spinach, and sat down at the table with a plate that felt more substantial than what I was used to. I didn't expect much from it, but I noticed something within a few hours. I didn't feel that usual drop in energy mid-morning. I wasn't reaching for another cup of coffee to keep myself going. There was a steadiness in my body, a quiet kind of strength that carried me through the morning without effort. So I did it again the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes it was eggs, sometimes yogurt with nuts, sometimes something simple but nourishing. I didn't overcomplicate it. I just made sure that I was giving my body something real, something it could actually use. And just like with the other changes, the results didn't shout. They whispered, but they were there. Within a couple of weeks, I noticed I could carry my groceries without hesitation. I could stand up from my chair without pushing off the armrests. I could hold my great-granddaughter when she visited without feeling my arms tremble. Each of these moments felt small on their own, but together they created something much bigger. They restored a sense of capability I thought I had lost. What I began to understand slowly and clearly was that strength doesn't disappear overnight. It fades quietly when we stop supporting it, and in the same way, it can return when we start paying attention again. By this point, my mornings had changed completely from what they once were. I no longer woke up dreading the day ahead. Instead, I moved through a series of simple habits that supported me in ways I hadn't thought possible before. I would wake up and drink my glass of water, giving my body what it needed after hours of rest. I would step outside and let the morning light touch my face, reminding myself that the world was still there, still moving, still inviting me to be part of it. I would sit with my notebook and gently wake up my mind, not forcing it, just guiding it. I would move my body in small, careful ways, building strength without strain. And I would eat something that actually nourished me, instead of something that simply filled the space of a meal. None of these things were complicated. None of them required special equipment or extraordinary effort. But together they created a foundation, a rhythm, a way of living that supported my independence instead of slowly taking it away. Now, when I look at my life, I don't see someone who is simply getting older and weaker. I see someone who has learned to adapt, to listen, to respond. I still live alone. I still manage my own home. I still do the small, everyday things that once felt overwhelming after my husband passed. I sweep my porch in the mornings. I water my plants and watch them grow. I write in my journal, filling the pages with thoughts I once kept to myself. When my family visits, I don't sit quietly in the corner. I move around, I participate, I laugh. There is a sense of presence in my life now that I didn't have before, even when I wasn't alone. And if there is one thing I have learned through all of this, it's that independence isn't something you either have or lose all at once. It's something you maintain, something you protect through small, consistent actions. It doesn't require perfection. It requires attention. If you are living alone or if you know someone who is, understand this. The difference between slowly fading and slowly strengthening often comes down to the smallest choices, the ones that seem too simple to matter, the ones most people overlook. You don't need to change everything overnight. You don't need to become someone completely different. You just need to start paying attention to the way you begin your day, because the way you begin your day quietly shapes everything that follows. I'm not the same person I was a few years ago, sitting at that kitchen table waiting for the hours to pass. I'm still growing, still learning, still finding ways to care for myself in a world that often assumes I can't. And I believe truly that it's not too late for anyone to do the same. No matter your age, no matter your situation, your body is still listening. Your mind is still capable. Your life is still yours to shape, one small decision at a time. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, you have a choice to repeat what you've always done or to begin quietly to do something different.